I wanted to briefly touch on the topic of abuse of power. It's a term I'm sure we've all heard of, but there are a variety of settings and situations in which abuse of power may occur that we may not have considered. And I'm going to touch on 9 different areas in which this could be a problem. The term itself, abuse of power, is the overreaching of authority or misuse of authority, malfeasance, and it can also include a failure to act or be responsive in one's position of power, so failure to fulfill the duty of that position. So the first area I'd like to talk about is the judicial area, the justice system. Conflict of interest checks are a large ethical portion of attorney representation, judge assignment to cases, things of that nature. So for me, I've worked for the court system, I've worked for the district attorney, I've worked for the public defender, I've been an advocate that's accompanied many victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking to legal hearings. So the conflict of interest pool for me would be rather large in the community that I come from. And obviously, when you come from a small community, it can be hard to avoid those conflicts, but it still doesn't negate the fact that it's an ethical duty to ensure there are no existing conflicts in those cases. So, for example, it would be highly inappropriate for my former employer or coworkers to be involved in any kind of legal matter pertaining to me, for example. The second example of abuse of power would be through law enforcement. So, for example, the allowance of lawlessness to allow crimes to occur without failing or with failure to respond appropriately and take action if an officer is aware of crimes being committed. For example, if a community member is being targeted and abused by the community and they don't intervene or respond appropriately, that would be an abuse of power. There's also a term known as slanting, and that is when an officer builds a case based on their personal theories. So they establish a theory about what happened first and then collect evidence, witness testimony, and provide statements in that report that will support the personal narrative rather than investigating without bias and allowing the evidence to build the case. So, for example, a witness that knew someone in the 5th grade versus a witness that knew someone since the 5th grade would have very different values in witness testimony. So it's critical that law enforcement remove personal narratives from their mind of what they think happened and allow the evidence to build the case so that it's an ethical, unbiased investigation. Thirdly, there can be abuse of power in the workplace. We've all heard of nepotism or sexual harassment in the workplace, but there can also be abuse of power if there is targeting of an employee or if a manager attempts to blame one of their underlings for one of their own mistakes to negate their own responsibility or discipline, to conspire against an employee, for example. For me, I had an employer that would request the health records of all the employees and then use that information in a discriminatory way in determining how that employee would be placed based on the longevity that they deemed would be likely based on the health history of that employee, which is a considerable abuse of power. Another area in which abuse of power may occur is in religion. So religious leaders we tend to trust. And so if a leader misuses that trust and is conveying information to a congregation as if it's factual and true, and the members are blindly following, that's abusive if that leader is knowingly misleading them or basing the communication off of their own thoughts, opinions, gossip, not really factual information, and leading others astray by abusing that role of authority. Community abuse of power can occur if members of the community are aware of unethical things happening, if there is group targeting occurring, not to be confused with the marketing tactic of group targeting. That's more positive marketing strategy. But group targeting in the sense of bullying, ganging up on a community member, committing crimes against that community member, and members of the community being silent bystanders and abusing their power as community members by not standing up and doing something, as well as entities such as the city council or other leadership components that have a duty to be responsive when something like that is happening within the community, and to respond appropriately and with the proper discipline of staff or volunteers or leaders in that community that are misusing their role to commit crimes or to behave unethically. There can also be abuse of power in healthcare facilities. Medical records are highly protected, HIPAA protected records. So those are confidential records that are only to be accessed with necessary purpose. So they're not there for entertainment purposes. They're not there to be obtained to conspire or for malicious intent. So anyone that has access to medical records and misuses that access to view or disclose, alter medical records is, in jeopardy of facing both civil and criminal penalty. It's a very serious violation. Also in the insurance industry. So insurance agents tend to have access to that HIPAA protected information as well. So there's that same duty to protect the privacy of those protected records. I used to also sell life insurance, so I am familiar with the double indemnity clauses that come with life insurance policies. And what that means is that if someone dies in an accident, the face value of that policy can double if that clause exists. So anytime there's a situation where there's, an intentional accident that's caused in a death for the purpose of a double payout, that's a huge red flag. Also, a life insurance policy cannot be purchased on an adult without the knowledge and consent of that adult. That's illegal. So an abuse of power would be an insurance agency that's allowing the purchase of policies without the knowledge of the person that the policy is being taken out on. That's highly unethical and an abuse of power. There can also be abuse of power in financial institutions. Banking information is private, protected information. So if an employee is curious and wants to check account balances in various, members' accounts, that would be an abuse of power. Or releasing financial information of someone, releasing statements would also be an abuse, especially again if that request for records is being sought for malicious intent. There can be an abuse of power in family dynamics. So a parent-child relationship, including, an adult child and a minor child. So if a parent is conditional and withholds approval based upon the decision-making of that adult child, for example, whether they make decisions in relationships or career or overall decisions that that parent prefers, the conditional withholding of acceptance and approval, if that adult child is not performing in the manner that that parent accepts, that's an abuse of power. And another abuse of power is in intimate relationships that have terminated. So, for example, a relationship has ended and that individual can no longer control the other party. The next step would be to control how others see that other party. So there could be slander, there could be fabrication of false narratives, false, stories about what happened in that relationship, making up a whole new set of information that is not real in order to impact how others see that former partner and the level of support they receive. This is a considerable abuse of power and is common in control and power dynamics in abusive relationships. So I just wanted to touch on those areas briefly. There's a lot more I could expand upon, but I do want to bring to light those 9 areas in which abuse of power can exist, because in my case, unfortunately, many, if not all, have been evident and prevalent in the case involving me. So just wanted to shed a little bit more light on that subject.